All right, folks, I'm Bret Kinsella. This is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week at 11 a.m. Eastern. At least we've done that for like the last 10 weeks. And this is, I think, our 27th or 28th edition right now, pretty much probably 27th, more than half a year every week. And my co-host, Eric Schwartz, is here today. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Hey, excited to get started.
Yeah, we've got a really packed list again. August, slow news month, right? No, not in this world. And this is what happens when you get these epochal changes in technology platforms and transitions. GPTBot is going to be on the list. We're definitely going to talk about that. Amazon revealed a lot more detail around their generative AI strategy, which has been coming together over the last few months. We're going to talk about Apple's been hiring a lot of people. Or it's got a lot of open job recs in generative AI. They seem to have woken up from their reality distortion field, which we can talk a little bit about. Hey, we've got some big funding rounds or some big valuations in funding rounds, weights and biases. And then I think Tome is still in the fundraising process, but we've seen like some big giant numbers out there. News from Bing Chat. We've got news from Universal Music and Google. A lot to go through today. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it should be a good show.
Okay, and I'm also excited to have a special guest join us today. James Poulter, welcome.
Hey guys,
your first appearance on the Generative AI News Rundown.
I'm glad to be here as always to chat all things news, and there's a lot of it, so I'm intrigued to see how much we get through.
All right, there is a lot of it, and we'll get through what we get through, and that's the way we always do it this week. James, the founder of Vixen Labs, one of the leading conversational AI consultancies out there, and doing a lot of generative stuff these days. So we get to your perspective here. Okay, and it looks like I might have a little lag going on. I'm not really quite sure why that is, but it doesn't matter because we are going to get right into the news. And we learned this week that GPTBot is coming. It's probably already exists. I think it does. But there's a new way that OpenAI is talking about this. So they are will be crawling, probably already crawling the web with GPTBot, but they're going to accommodate messages in the robots.txt file. So if you don't want it crawled, or if you only want part of your site crawled and another part you don't, that's okay. And they will honor that. They are offering you nothing in exchange for this, or at least nothing explicitly, although we can talk a little bit about that. But they are saying that if they crawl, they may use it for training. So, James Poulter, what do you think?
Well, I mean, first is to say that this was pretty inevitable at some point or other. We know that ChatGPT has been trained on a couple of different models now, 3.5 and the 4 model. Both have had caps in terms of historical data for how long those have been around. And so it was natural that at some point or other, they're going to want to update these models. And there's only so many tokens to go around in the archive of the web. And so if you want to start improving the content, context, and accuracy in particular of these models, you're going to need to start adding more real-time and up-to-date data. I think what's interesting is this comes obviously off the back of the heels of them pulling out the consumer-facing Bing integration for web scraping. So they clearly saw that there were some issues going on there in terms of like how well that's working inside of ChatGPT. And then you obviously need one of these bots out there crawling the web to start updating with the latest and greatest information. I think we certainly see this in the conversations we have at Vixen with clients, is that people want to know, what does the language model know about my brand or business? And I think this is the way it's going to know. And so you either want that or you don't. And so I think there'll probably be a couple of different classes of people that feel very differently about this. Certainly the big publishing houses, but also the forum websites, likes of Reddit, obviously have been up in arms in recent weeks around how large language model scraping is being done, and particularly the training sets that are going into those large models, they're not being compensated for it. So I think that we can see a similar reaction here, is that these bots are going to be out there scraping that data, and people will want to be compensated. At the other end, you've got people that want to be found, and they want to be found within not just ChatGPT, but in all experiences that are built off the back of the GPT models.
Yes.
And that's where I think there's going to be a lot of people now really rethinking their SEO strategy, for want of a better term, or their LLM EO strategy, or their EIO strategy. Like, we'll end up somewhere. But that's where I think there's a big opportunity, particularly for brands and businesses out there that want to be found.
Yeah, and Search Engine Journal had a really interesting article on this, and suggesting that maybe there's a different approach that you could have. There's a lot of Creative Commons open source licenses that could that could be used. That's never going to happen. They can talk about it. That might be an ideal scenario, but it's just like it's too precise. It takes too much effort. Nobody's actually going to do that. So what I think is, I actually think there is actually another thing, is that you can't actually put that many things in robot.txt. There's a limited memory space for that. So OpenAI is going to get in. I don't know when all these other bot crawlers come in, how that's going to be handled. But it is, I think, interesting that most people use robots.txt as a blunt instrument. And it's just like, it's binary. I either allow crawlers or I don't allow crawlers. Or allow specific crawlers, don't allow other specific crawlers. But they do have this idea that you can indicate to OpenAI what you want indexed and what you don't want indexed. So you could actually segment your content. And I think that's what we're going to have to see. So first and foremost, I agree with you that companies need to be part of this crawl, or else they're not going to be part of the conversation. And when inevitably ChatGPT is real-time connected to the internet and does compete directly with Bing Chat and Google, you want to be part of that conversation, because that's where it's going to come. Now, there will be other types of things architecturally with the retrieval model and all these other things that'll go on with it. But if you're not part of that crawl, and they're so dominant right now, it's going to be very difficult for you. But from a web SEO standpoint and from an IP protection standpoint, you're going to need to start think, okay, these are the things I want crawled and these are the things I don't, and then be able to segment them. Eric,
that's right.
That?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's irony exactly, but as you were saying, like the whole binary approach to robots.txt won't really make sense in this context. So on the other hand, if you have a ChatGPT or something like it, you can just ask it to make a robots.txt that covers the things you want it to cover and leaves out the things you don't want it to cover, and solve your problem in one go right there, especially if it is an API version linked to your actual database.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you want to say about that, James?
I'm sure. Well, I just think that this is not unsurprising, right? And like we've been seeing for a long time, we've been doing auditing and kind of analysis on what the voice search engines have on you, right? We've been doing analysis for a long time for clients on, hey, Alexa knows this about you, Google Assistant knows this about you, and that you can do something to impact that by changing the content on your sites. The real question here is, how long is it going to take for this crawler to begin to update the models in any way that's tangibly useful to consumers and to businesses, right? So, we're currently on, coming up on a 2-year delay window in 3.5 model and 4 model in terms of ChatGPT's knowledge base. Is this going to now enable them to, I don't know, monthly update, weekly update, real-time update the knowledge base of those models? That's where the value both to businesses and also to the end consumer actually comes in, and why you should potentially be allowing people to crawl the sites. Because if they're just crawling it for data harvesting and training, but we never see the benefit of it, then it's not particularly helpful to you. So I think we're going to be interested to see how long before we can start doing A/B tests between content pages that have been updated versus those that haven't, and how long it takes to show up in the actual consumer applications using the APIs.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. This will play out over time, I'm sure. I think a bunch of people will make a point of saying that they're not allowing crawling, and they will quietly reverse that at some point in the future. Because if you're not in the conversation, you're not in the conversation. And increasingly, knowledge management, knowledge harvesting is going to be hitting these large AI models. And OpenAI, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's appropriate that it's been 2 years since they've crawled the web or not, they're number one in market share. And so you better get on board or be left behind, would be my view. All right, let's move into another topic. So it was fun. It's always fun talking about OpenAI. Oh, there's new ChatGPT features. They're sort of rolled out, sort of not. But I will say, just to close on OpenAI, being able to upload documents, really useful, right? And so I've been using Claude 2 a lot. If anybody's not using this and being able to upload documents, it is a tremendous feature. So I recommend everybody check that out.
Yeah, and worth noting that the ChatGPT code interpreter, you can upload some interesting documents to it, but it's really buggy if you try it. So just watch out.
The thing I should warn people about Claude 2 as well. I mean, it's like the verification you have to do on uploaded documents is a level above what you might even expect. So for example, I was using it to do some unstructured data analysis that happened to be in a lot of rows, maybe a spreadsheet. And it had a couple hundred rows, but it would think there were 96 rows. and things like that. So you could get it to do the work. You could absolutely get it to do the work. You just had to make sure you understand what it was doing and then ask it to like consider other data and things like that. And it was still much faster than like unstructured data. You've got multiple sentences. I mean, they would take hours to go through and collate. And so it takes 15 minutes, right? As opposed to like, if it worked perfectly the first time, maybe it would take 5, but it's still really, really useful tools.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've tried messing around with Claude and also Perplexity's upload features, and they definitely have their benefits. Perplexity's PDF analysis actually is really good. So if you are more kind of in the document world rather than the data world, definitely worth giving that a try. But there's some way to go before ChatGPT has it. And of course, please be cautious with what you upload to these systems.
Don't talk to me about governance. All right. So next story today, we want to talk about Andy Jassy. He's been talking a lot. He's been talking a lot more than I think people think about it, because he's been trickling things out. So if you look at what they said in some interviews, like in January, it was kind of like, oh yeah, like this seems pretty interesting. We've been working on this for a while, but they sort of like changed the subject. By the time you got to March, you had an SVP over there at AWS saying, hey, oh yes, we are, we're in on this, and we're only 3 steps into a 10K raise, so we're not behind. And then like a month later, the annual report letter from Jassy says, hey, we're doing a lot in this. And then in July, he said, oh, we're doing more and more. And some of the things actually that came out that were headlines in the earnings call this week actually had already been said, but they'd been said in maybe a less forceful way. But I think that it's really interesting to see what Amazon is doing. So, as we predicted, and Cynthia and Eric was part of this as well, Amazon's going to go for the everything else strategy. So OpenAI, you can be the market leader. A lot of people are going to use Google just because a lot of people always use Google. But we're going to be the home for everything else. Not to say that you can't get other services on Azure, because we're starting to see that, like Meta's coming on, you can get Nemo, but like, come on, you know what the king of that castle is. And not to say that Google Cloud isn't offering, because they do. They've got a half dozen other models that they do offer. But I think the incentive is going to be for all of these other foundation model players is to promote their AWS presence, because Amazon is not going to try to switch people from Cohere to Triton, for example, whereas Google almost certainly will through incentives and other things. Maybe not explicitly, but sort of tacitly start to do that. But if we think about this everything else strategy, I think it's really interesting. And I think there's a couple other ideas. So like this idea of they're creating an online store for generative AI foundation models, really good idea. They talk about the 3 layers. And so we talk about the, at the very low level, we talk about the chip and hardware layer. And a lot of people haven't really been following this. The Inferentia and the Trainium chips, they're looking at this operational excellence positioning. We can run your training less expensively. And while doing the less expensive approach might give up some quality, we don't know that yet. We might be in a scenario where that's not an issue. And but even if it is, it depends on what you are. If you're doing the foundation model, maybe it's a big deal to have the top training scenario. Maybe if you're just doing an application for your enterprise, maybe like cost is another one. And then we have other layers, which are actually the actual workload, the cloud hosting. And then we have the application layer. And they're saying, hey, we're playing in all 3 of these areas. And so I thought it was really interesting to lay it out. I think maybe Eric, why don't you give your perspective first, and we'll go to James.
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely think you're right that it's not like Amazon hasn't been doing things, but sort of quietly, and it's interesting because it's not just that they're doing an everything else approach for generative AI, but also sort of because Amazon has so many sections and so many teams and groups. They're making it a part of a lot of those groups, so it's very much a part of AWS. But as I wrote about, the Ray Prasad, who's was put in charge of everything Alexa last year, is also now heading up a group involved with generative AI and bringing that technology into the consumer space, but not necessarily into devices yet. And also this has been something that Amazon's been sort of outsourcing. They've had several Alexa prizes where they're deliberately seeking out universities and academic teams to come up with ways of training robots, of training AI to interact in the real world in a more conversational way that is very reminiscent of ChatGPT. Amazon has a finger in a lot of pies, and has a connection to NVIDIA. It has a connection to Hugging Face. It has a connection to every other important player besides its direct rivals, I would say. So, it's going to be part of every conversation going forward. And Andy Jassy, I think, is correct in saying that, yes, they're going to be there no matter what the headlines necessarily say.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think Mikhail's point that you just threw up there, Bret, in that comment around AWS, this is the place where the majority of people have got their applications hosting, their storage. It makes sense that that's the logical place that if you're going to start diving into Gen AI, you basically are picking between one of the three big players. You're either doing an open source piece, probably using a meta model, but maybe someone else's. You're either that, or you're an OpenAI Azure house, or you're an AWS house. And then, from a Google perspective, you're right. I think they're going to fight them on every potential front, both on the model front, on the hosting front. They're giving away cloud credits like they're candy in order to get people to switch to Vertex and to the Gen App Builder and stuff. And I think they will. And I think a lot of people will want to do that, particularly if you think about, I think particularly for people building, kind of mobile deployments, thinking about building on Android, those types of scenarios, people are going to go there. But for many people, it's a logical thing to try and keep as much of their, if you're running Lambda, if you're running S3, your next logical thing is to go and run your model, foundation or otherwise, whether it's a third-party model or an AWS model inside of AWS. I think that they know that. And I think the interesting part, I think, as you mentioned in the top of your story on Cecilia as well, is with Rohit coming across from the Alexa business into the AWS business to run this, I think is really telling about the way in which they're thinking about how AI is going to be a part of the Amazon stack. In the same way that they've thought for the past 7 or 8 years on Alexa being a throughput all the way through the business. You can see that this is becoming a similar strategy, and he's the right person to lead that, in my opinion. So I'll be intrigued to see how that plays out.
What does this tell you? This tells us that the top person in the Alexa business, and really that he wasn't the first person on the team, but he was there well before launch.
Yeah,
I've talked to him extensively about this. And he led all the early testing. He's been the head scientist for a long time before he took over. And so now he's head of generative AI. What does that say about the priority of Alexa? Is Alexa, does it mean Alexa's still important? It's subordinate? It's part of it? Or what does it mean?
My guess would be it's part of it, but the thing is that Alexa's done pretty well as a business unit, right, in terms of scale and in terms of how far and how wide they've been able to take that product offering. So it's a logical thing that you're going to go and tap the person that's led that development to lead this new frontier. It says to me that the Gen AI side of things has a way more headroom than Alexa does right now, which is logical because it's not.
It actually generates revenue, I think, is what you were.
The generates revenue bit is yet to be seen, right? Because actually, what Alexa has done, and I think what Gen AI will do, is not necessarily generate a bunch of front end consumer revenue, but it's going to generate a load of AWS hosting revenue.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So that's where that's
part of it, right? Like they always hope that AWS credits would be paid for eventually with Alexa, but yes. I mean, just in terms of the buckets, like for sure. I actually think it's good for Alexa, would be my view, is because
Agreed.
Rohit is so invested in Alexa. He's going to make sure the Gen AI brings it along and doesn't like forget it and start something new and like abandon it like Google always does.
And as you said on my video earlier in the week about the whole Alexa GPT thing, it's a natural thing that like if they lead out and build this Gen AI solution that really runs all the way through the business, Alexa will only reap the benefits of that in terms of getting smarter, in terms of making it easier to work with, integrations into AI and content. It's going to come. So I think it's a positive thing in the long term for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's the way you're saying about Roy is, I think it's important to note that like his vision, like he's a long-term future thinker. His vision for Alexa is always involved what sounds like generative AI in terms of how casual and easy to interact with and how functional it is in every setting.
Okay, and so a couple things here, just to close that out. Just by the way, generative AI wars are actually just proxy battles for the cloud wars. People haven't realized this yet because we all we're all subservient to the three major cloud providers and occasionally some others who come along. There's some interesting things going on. We'll talk about NVIDIA in just a couple minutes, but this is going to play out there. Certainly the product leaders in that space, the foundation models are going to be important, but the cloud companies are so dominant in computing right now that a lot of it's going to play out in their neighborhoods. And I think Amazon's got the strategy that they should adopt, and I think they're going to be successful. The one thing I do expect to see is that most of the open source players are going to wind up favoring AWS, and then if all the independents, over time, it's just a logical thing for them to do, so they don't have to compete against some sort of in-house favored child. Okay, so couple things here. Dominic, any links to docs? I'll try to start putting them in the chat as well, so people can see that. And my apologies, Andrew, our producer, is on vacation. We did let him go to Maine, in a place where he cannot be reached, and so if it's not running quite as smoothly as usual, well, we are definitely going to blame Andrew.
You can blame me. You don't have to blame Andrew. It's fine.
Yeah, well, there's other things we can blame you for.
That's true.
Okay, so folks, too, I know there's a few people online. I'm not really monitoring because I can't do that at the same time, but let us know you're here. Let us know where you're in from, YouTube, LinkedIn, where you're doing. And actually, if you're on one of those places, give us a like or share it or something like that. Get some more people in here and make comments like Mikkel and others are doing. Just let us know you're here. Make some comments. We'll try to incorporate it into the show. There's some good stuff around robots.text too. Dominic had this comment about should we have a special AI.text? That might be true. I think there's probably ways, as Mikkel said, to work with robots.text. Just as sort of a callback here. But let's not go backwards. Let's move forward. So those were our two featured stories for the week. And what we always do next in the Generative AI News Rundown is we then move into the funding fountain. And that's like, maybe people have noticed there's a lot of money coming into the space. And we have a new one here from Weights and Biases. So let's see here. I can share that in just a moment. But Weights and Biases, if you don't know who they are, it's tooling. And so like my lead conversation here is we've heard a lot about foundation models and we've heard a lot about applications. If you're not really into the space and following it closely, you're not spending that much time thinking about the tooling. Weights and Biases, if you don't know about them, are a huge company, 700,000 users. 2 years ago when they got their last funding round, only 100,000 users. So you can look at the expansion. That might be one indicator of the space. They raised $50 million on a $1.25 billion valuation. That's not bad. Up significantly from their last round. And they introduced some new tools around prompts, but it's not necessarily prompt engineering. It's actually to audit and have some observability in that. My friend James Poulter, what do you think about the tooling space?
Well, I think it's one area that we're going to see a massive amount of growth in over the next 12 to 24 months and a lot of new entrants to it. So I think it's good to see that these types of firms like W&B are able to raise at the level that they're at because, frankly, we're going to need some really robust tooling. I think that the real question is, on that kind of valuation, who are they exiting to in the long term is my real question.
I think they have to be a public company. I mean, it's possible that someone would bring it in-house, but it's going to be, I think going public is a good option. And then there are a few places that could potentially do it. I think of like New Relic potentially, but I have a feeling that we're seeing this like such a significant change that it's more likely that they'll get embedded in this space with fast growth, high revenue, and they'll actually start acquiring people in some of the legacy tooling spaces.
I think you're right about that as well, because I think they are going to probably get too big for that to be really a tasty acquisition for anybody else. But within the tooling space more generally, I think this is what we are already beginning to see, right? Is that like when this stuff becomes now much more consumer ready and people wanting to start deploying it in their own environments, they're going to need ways of managing this, particularly when you start talking about kind of the multinationals, the big global organizations trying to deploy this stuff. You need that tool set in the place. I mean, it reminds me very much of the early, like late 2000s, early kind of teens around like the social media space, right? You suddenly had the Buddy Medias and the Hootsuites and all these kind of things coming out and growing massively to be that layer over the top of the platforms. And this is the same thing that's going to happen in this area as well. We've seen the same thing happen in DevOps and in cloud. So I think this is a natural, kind of space. And probably will become the big area of growth and kind of excitement in the mid-market space. I think the area that these guys are focusing on, particularly with their large language model stuff, it's obviously that very dev tool heavy stack. It's not so much kind of catered to the average application developer or user. So I think there's still a lot of space in that end for us to begin to explore, and we're already seeing a lot of the friends that we've spoken about in previous kind of content, the voice flows and those types of people in the world that are building new sets of prototyping tooling and stuff like that on top. But these guys are playing in that very heavy kind of DevOps space, really helping scale up the usage of this management. I think it's natural that you're going to see more competitors come into this area, but also those big players want to fight that fight as well. And so I think
maybe like everybody's adding these types of things. So we've got Scale AI, we've got Snorkel, we've got LangChain. There's other people in this space that already have high profiles, but we're going to see a lot more of it. Eric?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think it's part of the evolution of the industry where it starts with the sort of black box, like, look at this amazing thing, and here's broadly how it works, but you can't really see it, and the evaluations themselves are sometimes hard to measure against each other. And now you have this idea of not only debugging the LLM itself, but also auditing what it produces and seeing more about they refer to the topology of it, and I think that's going to be a source of a lot of interest and honestly a lot of money in the next year or two as businesses and big companies adopt generative AI tools.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on. Let's go to the application layer and let's talk about Tome. So some people might know Beautiful AI. Maybe they know Tome. It is this idea of using AI, particularly generative AI, for creating presentations. And wouldn't we all like that? Just like type in what we want and it automatically shows up. There's actually some things that Microsoft's been doing. I can't remember what their design suite is. But it's like
PowerPoint.
They didn't put it into PowerPoint. They have this other thing that they use that I was playing with like a couple months ago. They gave me early access to it, and it'll actually create slides for you and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like it's not that great, or at least it wasn't then. It might be good now. But Tome is really interesting because people make presentations a lot. This is like a high need, and I was playing with it yesterday. It's okay. I mean, like when I was trying to do some free form stuff, it didn't really do what I wanted it to do, but I think there's probably a learning curve on my side. But I think the most important thing, or the more interesting thing here, is they're talking about a $600 million valuation, which, like, if you don't know who Tome is, you're like, oh, okay, I guess they're just like super popular. Well, 5 months ago, they raised $43 million on a $300 million valuation. And what I'm not sure exactly what their revenue run rate was, but this is $600 million valuation on $2 million in annual recurring revenue. Like that's not even how much they did the preceding 12 months, but that's their run rate right now, which is very often the way this is going. But there are people that are clearly making a bet here that Tome is going to be super successful. And they're the next PowerPoint. They're the next keynote. They're the next, they're the key independent player coming up. What do you think, Eric?
I mean, I agree. It's worth saying that that 43 million was led by Lightspeed and their deep pockets and big Rolodexes. So it suggests that either they trust a lot of the people involved with Tome, or they feel that they're going the right direction. But I mean, I think overall this part of generative AI as an industry is getting a lot of attention. I mean, we've seen examples of not just text to image or text to video, but full on text to marketing campaign, text to business presentation, text to pitch decks even. So I think if Tome is somehow proving to these investors that what they have is really that impressive, then they're gonna throw a lot of cash at them.
James, have you used it yet?
Yeah, I've actually been a Tome user for a few months. I've done a number of presentations in it for some of my kind of like LinkedIn videos and stuff where I want to kind of have GIFs that run nice and smoothly and things like that. Great for that kind of thing. I've got to say the actual like generative aspect of it, like write me a presentation about X, varies in quality wildly.
Have you ever gotten a really good quality output from it? I mean, you can maybe get a good quality slide from it.
You can get a good quality slide for it. I think the thing that I like about it is its ability to suddenly pull in like a DALL-E image and a GIF and an image. Like that composition layer, I think is what it's really good for. Original thought it's only as good as the things it's relying on. And I think we can tell that it's not relying upon any of its own tech. It's relying upon APIs from ChatGPT and from DALL-E and other tools. So it's only as good as the prompt is for those things. The context window doesn't seem to be particularly wide either in terms of what you can feed it for prompting. So that also I think is quite limiting in terms of how much you want to put there. What I have used is their document to slides feature, which I think is pretty smart. Canva has a similar proposition within their platform. And I think the real question here for the valuation for me is like, does this win when Microsoft Copilot is run out at scale within 365? Or does this win against Canva, which has many other kind of use cases rather than like this single point solution of just doing slides? I mean, there are obviously other apps that do slides well, but Google are leading in this. These guys, Microsoft are going to lead in this. So I think they could certainly find themselves a very nice exit at some point or other to one of the other big productivity suites. I'm sure Adobe's looking at them, Salesforce probably is looking at them, but I don't think that they're going to be around for the long haul as their own standalone. That would be my bet.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of money to raise, though, if they are going to be acquired anytime soon.
Well, we'll see. And it's also rumors. Yeah. So, remember Stability AI was talking about like larger numbers, like 4 billion, and then like looks like they didn't get that, and in a valuation round. So there might be, or we actually are seeing, I think, a little bit ratcheting down. Yeah. But
and we've seen a lot of valuations, it's worth saying, on talent, not on product recently as well. Yes. So to your point about like, do they make an exit on that valuation because of the product, or do they make it on that exit because of the team? And I think that that's something that people are going to be willing to pay for.
Yeah, and I think Tome, like everyone agrees, is like a strong team. It's like if you were going to look at character AI, right? You're looking at the team as much, and now it's like pretty expensive to buy that team. But we've seen that in the past that actually can work out pretty well for folks. Yeah. And Mikkel said that Tome's biggest risk is it becomes a feature, and I think that's really where it is. I mean,
that's it.
My bet would be on Canva and Microsoft, at this point. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. Maybe there's room for this.
Maybe.
Okay, let's get into.
Well, I was going to say, guys, that this is where unfortunately I have to leave you. I think, as I mentioned, so it's been a pleasure to hang out for the half hour. But I'm excited for the stories you guys have got coming up.
All right,
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, James. Appreciate it.
All the best.
Bye. All right, so Eric, you have a story here about Google and Universal Music. Tell me about it.
Yeah. This has been part of the sort of background during the debates over how synthetic media is produced, how it's made, where it's used, its use in terms of not only just in deceiving people, but even when it's clear that it's a deep fake, if it's misusing copyrighted material. There's a growing number of lawsuits around this, and Universal Music Group has been honestly impressively ahead of the curve in terms of trying to keep the artists that its clients from having their work stolen and used to make money for other people who are not them. And so I think the Universal Music Group recognizes that the Pandora's opened the box, the genie's out of the bottle, whatever metaphor you want to use. Synthetic media music is going to exist and is going to just spread. So they're trying to figure out a way to make it part of their existing revenue model of licensing, instead of licensing songs and getting paid for every time it's played in streaming, or obviously CD is purchased, if anyone still does that. Now they're talking to Google about making an official pipeline for licensing its music and the singers' voices for use in generating new songs, new performances. And it's still very early. It seems like nobody's commenting on it. It's just sort of people who are involved leaking that the discussions have begun. But if UMG and Google do reach a deal and Google can start producing official licensed deepfakes of Universal Music's enormous talent pool, including artists who have passed away, and all of the music that it owns synthesized or processed by an LLM into new songs. I mean, there's a lot of potential money there.
Is it going to be Google doing it, or they're just like opening up the doors so the creators on YouTube can do it?
They've started discussing it with Google, and so as I said, it's still very early. The impression that the reports have left is that they would essentially license their library or part of their library to Google, and then Google, who has their own generative AI engine specifically for music that they said is so good they're not making it available because they're worried about how it might be misused with regard to copyright. So they could then put UMG's library or an artist's voice through that system and come up with new songs, or
Yes.
at least the basis of new songs. So the idea being that you don't license a song, you license the I guess the database to make a song with AI.
Yeah. And so you have companies like Google, Meta, OpenAI, which are all doing like large foundation models, including music. We've got some independents that are doing music. We've got other companies like VoiceMod, which do voice changers, voice clones, like audio beds, different types of background music. So there's a lot of players that you can think of who are on the creation tool side. I wonder about this other angle, though, around some of the enforcement or creating some sort of pass-through licensing deal through YouTube, through TikTok, through Instagram and the other Meta properties and that type of thing. What's the word on that coming forward in terms of them actually identifying things that are likely deep fakes or clones, and then saying, okay, you can only do this if you pay some sort of royalty through this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the flip side of it is the detection tools. I mean, we've talked before about how, especially audio deepfake voices, the companies that are making these models are also producing ways to detect when their model is being used. The audio watermark idea. So I think that any sort of official licensed deepfakes are going to have to involve some sort of indicator that it is a deepfake. If you're going to have Frank Sinatra covering a Taylor Swift song or something, like, you're going to have to make a note of that, even though it's very obviously not something Frank Sinatra did. You're going to want to be able to say, this didn't happen. This is an AI generated thing.
I came across this guy doing really cool deepfakes where he's like mashing up these video podcast interviews with like famous people. And then he's doing some creative editing, which is just hilarious. And he just says it's parody. And so that would be, that's fair use.
Exactly. And to be honest, there are theoretically a lot of channels. I mean, there's not only the obvious of like a deepfake voice of a singer, but there's, the music they compose. Can the AI come up with a song they might have written, or a mashup that of two collaborators who never met in real life, or new lyrics and so on. There's potentially a lot of licensing money available for music companies, and UMG understandably doesn't want to have that not be something that they have a channel for.
I'm trying to decide if this is a more progressive approach than they took earlier in the technology wars, where they fought against Napster and like sort of all the soccer moms who were using what turned out to be pirated music, and then later did a licensing deal with Jobs and basically got the short end of that stick. It seems like maybe they're saying, hey, like, trying to stop this through the courts might be harder than just trying to get license revenue off of this.
I think the executives now are either veterans of those fights, or probably were those teenagers, young adults taking music from Napster, and they recognize how what that history has shown, and maybe they don't want to make the same mistakes. It's not that they won't necessarily make new mistakes, but it does imply at least an understanding of, hey, guess what? Technology exists. You can't really stop it. You can only try to shape how it evolves and how it's regulated. And if there's one thing that the music industry has shown in the last 130 years, it's that if there's a way to turn musical acts into money, they will find that way. And I think this is part of that search.
Oh, I thought you were going to say if there's a way to sue somebody over copyright.
Well, yes, that's but I think that every time that's happened, it's not that it doesn't necessarily work in individual cases, but recordable CDs.
Yeah, I got it.
it's never gonna work.
We'll see how it plays out. I think it is interesting that they're trying to get ahead of it, and they learned a little bit in the music streaming services, and they took their usury rates off of the platforms, and we'll see how this goes. But everyone should know that basically there's 3 companies that own most of the music rights, and they constitute an oligopoly with monopoly power. And someone should actually take a look at that if you really want to regulate it. Okay, so let's move forward. Let's talk about NVIDIA and Hugging Face. So you wrote this story. Tell me about what's going on there.
Yeah, so we've talked about NVIDIA as sort of the just the giant so large that people don't even notice it in terms of how it impacts the generative AI space. We were referencing it in terms of Amazon, how as big and important as Amazon is, its links to NVIDIA and access to NVIDIA's chips is part of what makes Amazon able to compete. And Hugging Face has been a really important part of the generative AI story as a hub for open source models, as a place for experimenting. It's where you see a lot of interesting ideas pop up that are then sometimes adopted by Microsoft or Google, and now they're working directly together to encourage more generative AI developers to, especially on the enterprise side, to work with open source models by linking them from Hugging Face to NVIDIA's what they call their supercomputing cloud, the DGX cloud.
Yes.
And they've created this training cluster as a service, a way to sort of build, customize LLMs, and give what are, open source often evokes this idea that's sort of like not as good or has a lot of issues. But if you connect it to these gigantic memory nodes that NVIDIA offers, you can do quite a lot. And they're charging quite a lot for it. It's $37,000 a month, but it's for companies who want to use generative AI, but maybe don't want to necessarily go the Microsoft Google route.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting service. I mean, playing in the premium space for them, having all this compute capacity, really focused on things like low latency, which is going to be important, not just training, but we're talking about inference here. And I think that's where DGX Cloud is probably going to stand out. I think it makes a lot of sense in this idea that there's going to be some big companies who are going to prefer open source because they don't want to be tied to any proprietary systems. Think financial services maybe, and they're trying to get an edge on folks. And they might also care about low latency, high performance. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I still stand by the fact that most open source activity is probably going to happen in AWS. But I really believe that NVIDIA has this opportunity to become, through DGX and through maybe open source, but like the Nemo stack and Picasso and all the other models that they have in their garden, could actually be sort of a high performance, high value destination that some people opt for.
Well, and you talk about, oligopoly in music. I mean, the cloud computing space, I mean, it takes a lot of resources to operate that kind of thing. And Hugging Face smartly has made deals with AWS, but they're non-exclusive. So now it can work directly with NVIDIA. We'll see. There's always some cynicism involved with those who host sort of open source hubs, but at the moment they seem very committed to their idea that open source should be an option for generative AI, and they want to make sure that that doesn't limit their users in terms of power or computing ability.
So just to differentiate between the music industry and cloud computing, cloud computing is actually a competitive industry. Sure. So you have concentrated competition, concentration in terms of market share, but you have heavy competition between them. Whereas in the music industry, they don't actually compete against each other other than to sound.
That's true. I apologize. Right? It is a difference. It's just
it's fine. I mean, it's like I just don't want people.
There's just a few big names that tend to be the fallbacks, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's really interesting. Keep an eye on that. Hugging Face, obviously a really key player in the open source community, particularly in the fact that they create this marketplace and have a really large developer community, which is important. Staying in the large language model world, Cohere kind of quietly talked about Coral not too long ago. You did a story about this. We finally caught up to it or got time to actually do it. Tell me what's going on with Cohere and why you think that's significant.
Yeah, so I mean, Cohere's been again, it's not necessarily getting every headline, but a pretty important and growing player in the enterprise LLM space. They've been making some important partnerships with conversational AI providers like LivePerson. They've worked with Google, which makes sense because it's like former Google people put it together. But the discussion of where the line between, we talk about as you're saying, the three layers and the line between the model and the application. And in this case, they have the model, so they decided, well, we may as well have our own application. In this case, a chatbot named Coral to bring the services it already provided, but make them more accessible to the average employee of a company who is trying to do some research or figure out a task at their job, and really just sort of streamline that process.
Well, let's talk about LLMs, just like in general, and sort of where Cohere plays in this. I think that we have OpenAI is sort of like a default standard at the moment, like easy to try, everyone knows that it works type of thing. Whether that'll be the case a year from now is a different story. But when you create a market, certainly you have advantages. There's people who are using Palm for sure. Through Azure, a lot of people are using OpenAI. I think they said 3 months ago it was 4,500 enterprises already. Anthropic has sort of this interesting feature in that they have the large context window with low latency. So it's both. So you can actually have this huge context window and you can have fairly low latency. So that's an interesting differentiation right now that I know it makes a lot of people consider them and use them for certain types of things. And then there's a lot of open source models like Meta and things like that have rolled out, which are an option, but that's more work internally. And so I think it's really interesting too, to say if you are okay with a proprietary model, or you want a proprietary model because you want a company standing behind it, and you don't want to necessarily go with OpenAI or Google, so where do you go? So Anthropic's certainly an option, particularly if you want that some of the features that they differentiate on, maybe AI 21. But then Cohere is out there, and Cohere hasn't been that differentiated. And we're an option too, and they're doing that. You don't want to run your data through Google or an OpenAI because maybe they'll steal it or whatever. This is a tactic people use in all these different industries. But I think it's really interesting. Coral, they're coming out with something I think that is very specific, and to me, that's what they need to basically carve out a space that they are sort of the one or the key alternative for some of these different use cases, and then they can build their base that way.
Yeah, and there's this sort of fluid nature of the applications in terms of how linked they are to a specific model, or how linked they are to a CMS of some kind. And if you have an internal service full of a company's history and financial data and product data,
yep.
Are you talking to that, or are you talking to something called Coral? I think these are all questions that are still very much up in the air, and I think these experiments are going to be important to decide what the shape of those services look like in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, keep an eye on Cohere. I think this is a very strong step forward. They haven't really made that much news about it. I expect to see more, and then we'll see. But I do ultimately expect them to be focused functionally and or industry-wise.
I will say it's notable their blog post about Coral was written and then by Coral and then edited by people, but generated by Coral.
Well, I hope it was edited by people. Okay, so another story we want to talk about. Oh, and by the way, if you guys have winners and losers of the week, anybody who's watching right now, you want to put them in the comments, feel free to do that. We'll try to do that. And so every week we do winners and losers, like who's doing well, who's maybe falling behind in the space. I'm not even sure who I'm going to say yet, so I'll have to think about that myself, but throw it in there and we'll do that. That's what we're going to do at the end. And this is Generative AI News Rundown. If you're not here regularly, join us at 11 a.m., make a comment, let us know you're here, jump in on the conversation. We'll try to incorporate it into our discussion. Okay, so you had another story this week about Zoom and an upgraded TOS, which sort of came out and then was revised. And where did we leave this?
Yeah, I was debating this as definitely a potential loser of the week for generative AI, because it's one of those things where talk about things happening quietly. Zoom updated their terms of service back in March when they started rolling out generative AI features, meeting transcription and summarization, things like that. And the way it was written said that they could use data from customers communicating over Zoom for machine learning and artificial intelligence training and improving of the services. And it got picked up last week by a blog that covers this kinds of stories called Stack Diary. And they, for whatever reason, it went mildly viral among people in the entertainment and tech industry who were very upset about the idea that their conversations on Zoom might be used for improving large language models.
Yeah. What about people worried about proprietary information getting used in training data sets? Holy cow. I mean, do we have no place that will be private to us anymore?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of interesting that it was definitely a mix of, on the technical side, and then people in SAG-AFTRA, writers and TV writers and actors who were saying that they were going to immediately leave Zoom and never use it again. And Zoom went into a bit of a panic mode, revising the TOS, putting out a blog, writing over and over that no, we're not going to use your data to train an LLM. It's the only bolded sentence in their terms of service now. But at the same time, they also talk about how they will use that information for what they call service-generated data and aggregated anonymous data, which implies that if you're using generative AI to summarize a meeting, for instance, that might be the service-generated data. It's not really clear. But they did say they won't use audio, video, or chat to train the AI model. So who knows exactly what that's going to look like? But I don't think all of the ruffled feathers have been smoothed down quite yet.
Yeah, I just have to believe that if they hadn't clarified that, they would have had a lot of cancellations this month. Because everybody, if you're using it for corporate, you're talking about proprietary information every meeting.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, Justine Bateman, who's the actress, who's also an AI advisor for SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Union, she said that she was going to no longer use Zoom and tell people to no longer use it, and she hasn't retracted that. She hasn't officially said, as far as I can tell, that she's reassured and it will go back to using Zoom. So I don't know what that means for Zoom's presence in Hollywood going forward.
Yeah, maybe they care. I don't know. We won't. Mikhail says we won't use it to train an LLM, but we will use it to train AI, which is exactly the way I read this too. It's like, oops. Now I get it that if they're providing a service to you, they have to actually use it. But this idea that they can aggregate it and anonymize it and things like that suggests to me that they have other intents as well. So we'll see how it plays out. This is going to be an important battleground. Maybe that helps. I don't know what the TOS around Microsoft Teams is. Maybe that helps WebEx or GoToMeeting become relevant again in this space. I don't know, but I think it's something that we should really look at, or we should track closely.
And yeah, I mean, if you run the TOS, the early TOS through a couple different LLMs and ask it to summarize or bullet point it, it does. It did agree with what the interpretation of that it was going to use your data to train an AI. So it seemed accurate.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so let's do. We have some other stories, but we're going to skip them. We're just going to talk about Apple because this was fun. They've got a lot of jobs open, and I've got a very long post here, but it actually shows what they're looking for, and I think that was very interesting. My view is a couple things. First of all, Apple doesn't want to do this. They're getting dragged into it. Yeah, they've been playing around with this as well, but everyone was writing these stories about Tim Cook says we've spent $20 billion in generative AI. That's not what he said. He said we've been investing in AI. It's most of our R&D. Okay, sure. There's a lot of AI stuff. Plus they make chips that are optimized for running AI models on devices and things like this. So people are wrong about this from an LLM and a generative AI standpoint. But it looks like they finally decided that maybe we should do something in this space because maybe we'll get left behind. Also, like, I don't see how this is not really important to Vision Pro. Maybe Siri as well, but like, who knows what they'll do with Siri. But it should be important to Siri. And then there's other features. And one of the things that we look at is, like, they talk a lot about mobile and edge. And so there are, they might wind up becoming a leader in that for certain types of application categories, large language models on the edge. Well, I could see that, and they can do that on their own timeline. Whether they can become a big player in this space, I don't think so. I think this is just going to be another feature for them. I don't know. What do you think? A couple dozen people that all the last couple of months, a couple dozen very specific generative AI roles, many dozens more around machine learning that have come up, maybe 600 or so. And most of this is in the last few months. So it seems like they're like, you know what, we'd like to do our own thing, but we might be missing something here.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree, and especially with regards to the on edge, in-device processing. I think that it's not under discussion too much right now, but much like with voice assistants, when they started becoming more popular, and suddenly there was interest in what's processed in the cloud versus what's on a device for both technical reasons like latency as well as privacy. And it was a couple of years ago, but Apple went on a bit of a acquisition spree for on-device, on-edge processing companies, and they're hiring a lot of people now, and maybe they will do it more in-house this time to begin with. But I would not at all be surprised if some of the startups that I've written about or that we see raising money, seed rounds right now, end up getting folded into the Apple projects in the next couple of years.
Okay, Eric, who's your winner this week?
I think I'm going to have to say, I guess I'm going to have to say the winner would have to be I think Adobe, actually, as I think about it.
Adobe?
Yeah, I know it's a little out of left field, but I had been keeping an eye on how they've been adjusting to more and more interest in generative AI. We've written about them coming out with new features and new tools, and they've it's a lot of relatively small expansions in the last week or so. But there was just a report out about how in their org chart, they've suddenly shifted quite a few higher ups into roles that have either a direct mention of generative AI or a team that involved in some sort of generative AI project. And it seems like they're really keen to get ahead of companies like Canva or Microsoft when it comes to this these sort of presentations and synthetic media for professional purposes. And so it's just because sure. I figured why not bring up someone new. I'm going to put them as my winner.
Well, Weights and Biases is my winner this week. And really, by extension, people who need that type of tooling and largely the tooling industry for generative AI. So we're going to see a lot of activity on that over the next year. Weights and Biases, like a standard for several different types of things for ML ops. So I think that's my winner. What would I say is my loser? I think my loser is, I'll go with Apple, actually. We'll just I want to say Zoom users, but I won't say that. I'll leave that for you if you want it, but I'll say Apple. Apple missed this. There's clearly opportunities. This is going to be something which is going to make their device ecosystem less competitive if they don't get on the ball really quickly. And I think they've got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say, again, I'm going to go broad. I'm going to say creatives in the music and also writing industry, both because while Universal Music Group may end up having a great deal for synthetic media and deepfakes, historically it's usually the musicians themselves who don't do well in those deals. And meanwhile, Amazon's begun selling books entirely written by generative AI that are often clearly based on certain authors, and the authors have no real recourse because there's no rules yet, either in terms of law or on Amazon about those books being sold. So it's not a great moment if you want to start being, especially an independent author on Amazon. So it's a tough week for them.
Yeah, I understand completely. All right, folks. I think that's a wrap for today. This is Gain. Hey, sign up for the Synthedia newsletter. bit.ly/Synthedia. Watch or read Eric's stories and voicebot.ai. Check all these things out. Come back and join us next week at 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll be back here talking about the news, and I guarantee you there will be more. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.